fashionable flapper had short, sleek hair, a shorter than average shapeless dress, a flat chest, wore makeup and was not afraid to apply it in public, smoked with a long cigarette holder, exposed her limbs, and was the epitome of a reckless rebel who danced the nights away in the jazz age. High fashion until the 20s had been for the wealthy woman, but because the flapper's dress was less complicated than earlier fashions, women were much more successful at being able to make the attire at home. The really rich still continued to wear beautifully embellished silk garments for the evening, but the masses had a newfound sophistication of very fashionable clothes. Between 1920 and 1928, corset sales declined by 2/3. Once a common fashion accessory was now diminished. Flappers refused to wear corsets and rolled their stockings to the knee to enable them to dance easily. The arms were bared not only for evening, but also for day, and the legs were covered in beige stockings visible to the knee, which gave an overall more naked look than ever before. By the 1920s, stockings with patterns were hot fashion items. Embroidery curled around the ankles and up to the knees. Flesh and soft pastel colors were popular, and they were made in either silk or artificial silk, known as art silk, later called rayon. 1920 saw a universal fashion for short hair. Hair was first bobbed, which shocked some older citizens since hair had always been thought a woman's crowning glory. In the 20s, a fashion mogul appeared. Her name, Gabrielle Coco Chanel, commonly known as Coco Chanel. She promoted styles we associate with flappers. She worked in neutral tones of beige, sand, cream, navy, and black, in soft jersey fabrics cut with simple shapes that did not require corsets. They were clothes made for comfort and ease in wear, making them revolutionary and quite modern. She was the creator of that little black dress. Men's fashion in the 20s, it didn't change dramatically. Men's fashion required a three-piece suit with a matching vest. It is essential that the vest be high V-necks with full body coverage. A short vest would not pass. The highness of the lapels is what sets the 1920s suits apart from the other eras and is a necessity to pull off the look. Pants were very high, sitting above the belly button, secured by suspenders or a leather belt. 20 suits are what set the path for many of the modern suit styles we see today.
Mr. Gatsby, I'd like to know.
Exactly who are you, anyhow? No time. Can't you see who this guy is? With his house, his parties, and his fancy clothes. I love you much. We were born different from you.
It's in our blood. Nothing that you do or dream up can ever change that.
Gatsby. He had a grand vision for his life since he was a boy.
I'm gonna fix things just the way they were before.
Just you and me. No amount of fire could challenge the fairy tale he had stored up in his heart.
Will you still love me when I'm no longer young and beautiful?
Is all this made entirely from your own imagination?
When I got nothing,
But I had the uneasy feeling that he was guarding secrets.
I know you will.
I wish I'd done everything on earth with you. I don't want to go.
And don't.
Last green light in my eye.
War and economic depression caused many to turn to God and others to turn away from Him. Major efforts were made to spread Christianity in the pagan nations, and communism emerged as a force opposing Christianity. Evolution challenged creationism. Protestants still dominated in their denominations and in their combined membership. Members of the mainline denominations made up the business elite, controlled major cultural institutions from colleges and universities down to local country clubs. No matter what their actual social class was, white Protestants considered themselves the real Americans. From their perspective, other groups, Roman Catholics, Orthodox Catholics, Jews, and black Protestants, were more American the closer they were to the white Protestant standard. But this white Anglo-Saxon Protestant dominance was already beginning to vanish, and the nation was well on its way to becoming a multicultural society. Through serious signs of decline in Protestant groups could be seen. There seemed to be a sharp decline in religious commitment. Denominational giving dropped, and although membership in the major denominations continued to grow, those who looked more closely could see that they failed to grow as quickly as the whole population. Smaller sectarian groups saw the most expansion during the decade, but this growth went unnoticed, since they started from small bases. Further evidence of the weakening attraction of religion, often cited by conservatives, was the decline in number of applicants for the foreign mission field. In 1920, 2,700 people offered themselves for missionary training. In 1928, that number had dropped to 252.
Prior to the economic boom, there was the post-war depression of 1918. The high demand for lifestyle goods cannot be met by the industry, needing time to adjust their facilities. Tanks and machine guns were no longer in demand. Cars and electric appliances were in want. In consequence, inflation rates went up. The slump was under control in 1918 and business began to pick up momentum, but the high cost of living remained. Industrial workers who had worked hard to supply the military with weapons and thus supported the American soldiers now started to go on strike to obtain higher wages. Employers fired many of them, especially those who had joined labor unions. Those fired were often not given a second chance. They found themselves in a cruel situation. Either they had to set up their own business, always a risky adventure, or they had to work for even lower wages. At the end of 1920, another short recession followed. Furthermore, when real wages for workers rose, this was not in proportion to the increase of productivity and profit. Consequently, individual purchase power even decreased although wages were raised. They earned less than half as much as would have been necessary to provide universal well-being. This maldistribution of income in the United States was worse than ever before. The top 0.1% of the American families in 1929 had an aggregate income equal to that of the bottom 42%. The people that added the roaring to the 20s were the new rich that had climbed up the social ladder and now lived in ostentation. Coolidge once said, "The business of America is business," and accordingly, he left the economy to itself. Productivity rose further and the wealth started to spread. The income was particularly spent on cars and new modern electric appliances like washing machines and electric stoves. Distributors of those appliances made fortunes, for example, General Electric. The effect on the stock market was positive indeed, and numerous investors often made tremendous gains within a few months. In contrast to the established upper class, the new rich did not inherit their wealth but acquired it by themselves. This myth from rags to riches, the American dream, was revived during this decade.
One huge event that took place in this decade was women's suffrage. On Election Day in 1920, millions of American women exercised their right to vote for the first time. It took activists and reformers nearly 100 years to win that right, and the campaign was not easy. Disagreements over strategy threatened to cripple the movement more than once. But on August 26, 1920, the 19th Amendment to the Constitution was finally ratified, enfranchising all American women and declaring for the first time that they, like men, deserve all the rights and responsibilities of citizenship.
If I could change the course of history for the 1920s, I would have eliminated the ban on alcohol. Prohibition was the highly disregarded law in United States history, and it led to many problems. Crime rings formed in competition of who would control the illegal sale of alcohol. These were the original American gangsters, the most famous of which was Al Capone of Chicago. These gangs contributed to a high level of violence and killing. None of this violence would have occurred if the prohibition of alcohol had never occurred, something that was ineffective from the start. The 1920s were a time of jazz music. During the 20s, artists such as King Oliver, Louis Armstrong, Kid Ory, and Duke Ellington defined the future of jazz in the United States and abroad. Jazz music influenced all aspects of society. Jazz poetry, fashion, and industry were affected by the music that took the United States by storm. Jazz music also exacerbated the racial tensions in the post-World War I era.
The two biggest parts of popular culture in the growth of the 1920s was the rise of Hollywood and the rise of the power of gangsters who smuggled alcohol across state lines. Although alcohol was illegal and bars were shut, a certain type of place called a speakeasy came to fruition. Gangsters such as Al Capone ruled the streets of America. Not only were there bootleggers, but bank robbers such as John Dillinger were regarded not as bad men, but folklore heroes. They hid in plain sight around their peers who respected them. With the rise of movies and the start of major advertising, authors became not just local legends, but major celebrities. People such as Hemingway and Fitzgerald were known round the world for their works. Actors such as Charlie Chaplin and Greta Garbo were larger than life and treated as such. When they went to parties, they were filled with loosely moral women called flappers and people doing the Charleston. Most say this was the beginning of the modern age, the gateway to what life is like today.
Everybody get up.